Witness mic check. Witness mic check. Witness mic check. Are we good? We're all good. Member mic check. Member mic check.
Member mic check, 1, 2. Member mic. Witness mic check, 1, 2. Whoops.
Mic check, mic check. Good.
Okay, the Rules Committee will come to order. Climate change isn't some hypothetical, far-off threat. Its many impacts are being felt right now. Families are even being displaced, and experts have developed a new term to categorize this population, American climate refugees. The more than 126 million Americans who live along the coast are especially at risk for climate-related disasters. Catastrophic flooding, sea level rise, and coastal erosion have devastated lives, destroyed habitats, and decimated local tourism industries. In January this year, we saw the first Native American tribe forced to completely resettle due to climate-fueled flooding and erosion. If we do nothing, it won't be the last. But as grave as this threat is, I don't think we should just throw up our hands. The worst isn't inevitable, not if we act. That's why we're taking up H.R. 729 today. This is a bipartisan package of 10 bills to help us meet the scale of the problem we face. If we build more resilient communities, support groundbreaking research, and protect against some of the worst impacts of the climate crisis. And let me be clear about this. There's a lot before Congress in the final weeks of the session. Addressing climate change, one of the biggest challenges of our generation, deserves to be among them. I hope we can move quickly to pass this through the House in a bipartisan way that encourages the Senate to act and the President to sign it into law. And now I would like to turn to the ranking member, Mr. Cole, for any remarks he wishes to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I make my official remarks, and this is certainly not directed at you, but I just personally want to say I'm heartened that the federal government is now worried about moving Indian tribes off the land to someplace else. That's a new phenomenon in our history, and one we can take with a great deal of pride. Anyway, seriously, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the beginning of what I expect to be a packed week, both for the House and for this committee. Tonight's hearing is on H.R. 729, the Coastal and Great Lakes Communities Enhancement Act. The bill before us tonight is a package of 10 smaller bills, mostly focused on programs that impact the coasts of the United States and the Great Lakes. I'm gratified that all 10 of these bills have bipartisan co-sponsorship to one extent or another. Indeed, I'm even a co-sponsor of one of the bills in this package. Although I support parts of the package, I know that Republicans on the Committee on Natural Resources have concerns about the package as a whole, and I look forward to hearing their concerns at tonight's hearing. I'm hopeful that this committee will be able to report out a rule that addresses those concerns and allows the full House an opportunity to make their voices heard on this package. With that, I look forward to our hearing, but before I yield back, I want to express our side, and I know every member's of this committee's condolences on the loss of your father. We all feel for your loss and know that what an extraordinary impact he had on your life.
So. He was a good man. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I'd like to call the first panel, the gentleman from Hawaii, Mr. Case, and the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Bishop. Please come forward and feel free to summarize your testimony. And Mr. Case, you may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member, members of this committee, for the opportunity to represent our Natural Resources Committee majority in support of H.R. 729, the Coastal and Great Lakes Communities Enhancement Act. This bill consolidates 10 excellent bipartisan bills that the Natural Resources Committee has fully heard in order to be reported this year. You have both made mention of the fact that these are bipartisan, and I take the opportunity to emphasize that. Every one of these bills is bipartisan, and this bill, as one package, is truly bipartisan. This bill, as you said, Chair, responds directly to the crisis and challenge of our time, climate change, with a direct focus on our endangered oceans and lakes. This is, of course, an international challenge, since our oceans and lakes don't much respect our own man-made boundaries. But in our country, the brunt of marine-related climate change impacts is borne by our coastal communities. Over 40% of Americans live in coastal communities. These communities not only account for nearly half of our U.S. gross domestic product, but they are on the front lines of climate change and need resources today to help prepare for and respond to the effects of climate change, whether it be flooding, sea level rise, severe weather, coastal erosion, and changing water conditions that directly affect ecosystems and fish populations. These are all disasters that have both already happened, just ask the East and Gulf Coast for just some coasts, and are waiting to happen. Every dollar invested in pre-disaster mitigation saves at least $6 in recovery costs, according to a generation of hard data in the disaster mitigation study category. H.R. 729 includes bipartisan measures that will do this in 4 ways. First, it will improve coastal resilience and economic enhancement by making several important updates to the Coastal Zone Management Act. This law, a revolutionary law at the time, was signed into law in 1972 to establish a partnership between the federal government and the coastal and Great Lakes states to protect and restore coastal areas. These updates include authorities to help states develop coastal climate change adaptation plans, help Indian tribes develop projects to restore and preserve coastal areas of ecological and cultural significance, help communities preserve working waterfronts, and allow the District of Columbia to participate in the Coastal Zone Management Program. It will also help communities implement climate-resilient living shoreline projects that use natural materials to protect communities and ecosystems instead of hard or armored walls and infrastructure that we know are less effective. Second, it will reinforce fish habitat conservation and fisheries research. This bill includes the National Fish Habitat Conservation Through Partnerships Act bill that will formally codify this partnership, a community-led public-private partnership that funds habitat conservation projects. It will also authorize steady funding for the U.S. Geological Survey to conduct science and research activities to support fishery management in the endangered Great Lakes and restore the loss of basic fishery science capabilities and accelerate implementation of new technology. Healthy fish habitats support hundreds of thousands of jobs in the recreational fishing industry, and Great Lakes fisheries support over 75,000 jobs. Third, recognizing that responsible management of the oceans, coasts, and Great Lakes relies on robust data, this bill will reauthorize the Integrated Coastal and Ocean Observation System and, for the first time, formally authorize the Digital Coast Partnership, both of which are led by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. These programs facilitate the dissemination of environmental, ocean, and coastal data to users to make informed decisions. And finally, H.R. 729 will update the invaluable National Sea Grant College program to ensure that the United States has a strong marine and coastal science and policy workforce so that we can continue to develop smart policy solutions into the future. This bipartisan package includes bills led by members from across the country and across the aisle. It is also supported by such diverse groups as the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation, the Teddy Roosevelt Conservation Project, the American Sports Fishing Association, and the Ocean Conservancy. It is a good, solid, inclusive, overall, targeted bill that deserves your support, and I ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you. Can I first of all give my condolences as well? I recognize in a situation like this, intellectually, you may understand that it may be for the best. Separation is a short time, but in here, it will take time for that to heal. So I recognize that. We have condolences for you. Thank you again for the opportunity of being here. Yeah, I don't believe that either. So this bill can probably be considered as part of the cost of impeachment. I realize that we are so enthralled with that we're not doing anything else, but you need to have the illusion that we're actually doing something. So you have cobbled together some bills that basically don't do anything at all. In fact, you'll find the majority of these bills are already being done, or they have the authority to do what they're being proposed to being done. So indeed, if this is supposed to be the program that you have as a Congress to do something about climate change, you failed. It shows that we really don't have a program whatsoever. In this cacophony of 10 bills, 3 of them actually are good enough to just go on suspension. We wouldn't ask for a vote. We fully support them. There is one that a minor amendment would make it perfectly acceptable to us, and there is one of those minor amendments that was made, a Democrat amendment, that I certainly hope you will make in order as you deliberate on what you've already done. But with that would have made this that hopefully will be in the rule that takes place. You have 5 in here that don't have Senate counterparts, which means the fact of those going forward is basically non-existent. You have another 5 which do, as the testimony given to us by NOAA and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service said, they're already doing it, or they have the authority to do it. So we're not doing anything else except adding some cost to it with those additional programs. There are 2 that actually are, I think, extremely problematic. The Coastal Zone Management Act, which was actually signed by Nixon, if you want to have some in the parameters of what we're talking about during these couple of weeks. It was the way of getting federal funds to help states that are on the coast to meet coastal plans for the states. You're now expanding that to include Washington, D.C., which is not a state. It's also not coastal, and it doesn't have the same kind of significant quality. I mean, if you're going to do that, you might as well have every city along the Mississippi and the Ohio do it. You might as well add my city, Brigham City. At least I'm by brackish water, which comes close to the concept of what coastal zones are. But it also provides some situations in which, in that act, you've given states some ability of being able to void federal actions under certain circumstances. To give that same priority to the District of Columbia is going to present authoritative problems of who actually has jurisdiction that will only be decided by the courts. This is something that's time is not yet ready to be here. You've taken another program in one of these to create mandatory intern programs, which will allow some members of Congress to have more help without coming out of the MRA, but it will be mandatory that it has to be done and will be paid for by another fund, which, in the best, is somewhat sleazy. In essence, what we have here is a program that, I'm sorry, it's still not ready for prime time, but it does do one of those things that we're seeing more and more of, which is lumping stuff together. Probably in our committee, still the most significant bill we have to present out that will actually do something deals with park maintenance backlog. It still has 330 sponsors and co-sponsors. It still actually accomplishes the goal, but it still hasn't come to the floor because people want to lump it with something else, as if you can hold that as hostage for another issue. That's what you've basically done here. The basic Kilmer bill with that one amendment is a decent, good bill that will clarify the situations. But it needs to be clarified, otherwise you'll have, if the tribes and the states have a different plan, they've got to be brought in some kind of continuity together, which is what the amendment will go forward with on that. But lumping them all together is not necessarily a program, it's not a plan, it's simply what you do to try and hold stuff as hostage, to threaten, as my favorite line from A Man for All Seasons, you threaten like a dockside bully. And they said, how should I threaten? Like a minister of state? We should be writing stuff that is legislation, not cobbling crap together that stupidly adds us something. I gotta get 2 more stupids in here, I'm sorry. I'll eventually get there. Explain later. In fact, I lost where I was, which is kind of like this bill is. It's a whole pattern of stuff that you just kind of threw together in a way of saying, this is our program, when in reality, it is no program whatsoever. It has a couple of bills that should be done simply by suspension, and a whole lot of bills that are redundant. They're already being done. They have no value or purpose in being here. And a couple of bills that really are problematic. And putting those with the Kilmer bill in the first place is actually going to make it more difficult to actually get something all the way through the Senate when it could have been done in a different way. There are a whole lot of amendments that have been proposed. We haven't proposed any from our committee simply because it's not really worth it. But there are some that I'm worried, and I hope you will take concern of it as you're trying to have people who are adding different bills in here. There are some that have been proposed here that, in my opinion, are extremely problematic because they're simply flat out not germane. And I certainly hope that as you were considering what you're going to do with what you will consider, that you're looking at the germaneness issue on whether you add more stuff to this cacophony of bills. With that, if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to try and get through that.
Thank you very much. Obviously, germaneness is a big issue when deciding what amendments should be made in order or not. But I just want to point out for the record that we are doing a lot of work this week, and some of it I think is pretty important. I think some of the bills that we're bringing before us today, I think, are important to a lot of people, but we're hopefully tomorrow dealing with the NDAA conference bill, which I think everybody has been clamoring to get done. We have to fund the government. Hopefully, we're getting close to not just a continuing resolution, but to a year-long funding bill. There's talk that we may be close to a deal on the USMCA agreement, which I know many people think is important. We're going to deal with a bill on prescription drugs. We have differences of opinions on how to deal with that, but that will be coming up. A bill on agricultural workers, which I know a lot of our farmers care deeply about. So I know, I think some of this work is actually pretty important, but I yield to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Hastings.
Mr. Chairman, I thank Mr. Case and Mr. Bishop for their testimony. I don't have any real questions. I wanted to get Mr. Bishop's views with reference to some of the amendments, even though they may be lumped together. Are they of substantive importance to the coastal and Great Lakes concerns? You don't deny that there are concerns.
Are you talking about the amendments that have been filed or the bills, the 10 bills that are in this package?
Everything in this package.
The bulk of this package is already being done and can be done. They have the authority of doing it. You don't need this stuff to get what they're attempting to do.
Okay, then let me just peel out.
Although this probably is even more important than the ones you were talking about that you're considering this week. I'm sure this rises above NDAA. Yes, Mr. Hastings.
I have witnessed the diminution of coral, as for example, and I just filed a couple of amendments. I know that it's a problem, and I know that it's a problem having to do with tourism or having to do with fish and their abundance or lack thereof. So I just, you don't say that diminution of coral is not important. And maybe it shouldn't be in this bill from your point of view, but you would agree with me that it is an important issue that we should address at some point.
No, I'm not denying that what you're saying is significant. What I'm saying is passing of these bills doesn't make a bit of difference.
All right.
NOAA already has the ability of doing what you want them to do. Whether they passes or not, you can still go forward in that. Same thing with Fish and Wildlife in the Great Lakes. They already had the ability of doing what this is allowing them to do.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Cole.
I'm going to build on my friend's question, just ask 3 simple questions to get a little more specificity, because I think I've got the general gist of your concerns, and I think they're well-founded, as they always are. Can you give us 2 or 3 things in here that you really think are appropriate? In other words, that we should be doing? Just pick me off 2 or 3 things you think. I'm obviously personally interested in the competitive grant program award to Indian tribes to treat tribal coastal zones. Is that a good idea? There are other things in here you think are good. And then I'm going to ask specifically the things you think are bad, and specifically the things you think we should be doing or can be doing without this legislation at all.
So 729, the original Kilmer bill, that is, I'm lumping the other stuff together, is indeed one of those things that I think should have gone on suspension, with the suggestion that the issue at hand is, if you're allowing the tribes to then come up with their plan and the states and then superimposing them together, is there a way of making sure we coordinate? That is something that is the only thing that needs to be done to that bill, and then you've got something that should have been a suspension. We would all agree to that. There is an amendment that is before you that actually would accomplish that change. So that bill, there's a couple of others in there. The Young bill, the Ruppersberger bill, easily should be unanimous consent that we would agree to without any kind of even requesting some kind of vote on those. Those are decent bills.
Okay. And which are the areas where you think we're literally gilding the lily, so to speak, that the agencies in question could be doing these things without legislative instruction?
Well, that was, for example, the Pallone bill. NOAA said the agency already provides the technical assistance. They are indeed doing it. This one is the Pingree bill. Under the Coastal Zone Management Act, coastal states have the discretion to use funds for the many purposes that would be addressed by the Working Waterfronts Grants Program proposed. That's a direct quote, once again, from them that was in committee. The Carmela bill, same thing. They say they already have the authority to do it, and they are doing it already. The only thing that would make a difference if you actually enact these bills is that you would be adding another agency, which would add an extra cost to it. So you don't get any more benefit, but there will be a cost to the federal government, which I think the entire package scores at 1.4 billion? 1.4 billion. And once again, that's not coming from those 3 bills that should be suspensions. Those are coming from the other bills, and especially the last 2 that I mentioned that deal with the Washington, D.C. being added to the Coastal Zone Management Act, as well as the one that established the Works Grant programs that would be mandatory instead of discretionary spending. Those are the ones in which you're going to add a significant increase in the cost to the bills.
Now, are those, and this would be my last question, I mean, I've sort of looked at this as things you think are good, things you think are duplicative or unnecessary. There are things in here that you're really very concerned about that you think, you know, there's specific laws opposed to just the cost and the process that you would see as something that really is sort of getting enacted because it's got other good things around it, but it's a real problem.
Yeah, and you're putting me in a difficult spot. I don't want to have to be that, you're not putting me in a difficult spot. I don't want to have to be that definitive. Let's just say there are those 3 bills I mentioned first of all, Rubensberger, Young, the Kilmer one, easily should go through. The rest of it's not going to go through anyway, either because you have half of those that don't have Senate counterparts to them, or simply because they're adding an extra cost that's not being there, and because they are duplicative of what we are already doing at a cheaper price. So put those 3 through, you got it. The other 5, really, the other 7, it's not ready for prime time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Perlmutter?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. I'd say to my friend, Mr. Bishop, I'd say to the chair about my friend, Mr. Bishop, over the years, we've done a lot of things together. We went deep inside a mine in Idaho Springs, Colorado, and his humor's always had a little bit of a, you know, little kind of little punch to it, little sting to it. And I'd say to my friend, as the years have gone on, that stinger's gotten bigger, and I would yield back.
You can blame you because that was in the winter, and I didn't have socks on when I was going to that, so.
So, to the gentleman's point, he didn't have socks on in that tunnel, and we were in the middle of the tunnel, and he doesn't have them on today.
Mr. Burgess?
I don't have any questions, thank you.
Mr. Raskin? Mr. Morelli? Mr. Layla? Mr. DeSaulnier? Thank you very much. Are there any further witnesses? Mr. Morelli, do you want to testify?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick note on an amendment that I have.
You guys can go, by the way. Thank you.
Just a quick note on the amendment that I have, that 5% of the funds for the Working Waterfronts Grant Program be made available for technical assistance. And these funds provide state and local governments early-stage resources, planning assistance, and additional expertise which can expedite the development of resilience projects. And the amendment would provide that assistance to state and local governments is available in the process of obtaining federal funds, developing and implementing working waterfront plans, integrating resilience into waterfront planning efforts, and disseminating best practices. So for our waterfront communities, and I represent in my district, Lake Ontario, the Southern Shore, for our communities who have really dealt with the challenges of climate and the water levels, time is of the essence, and the assistance would accelerate smarter planning for communities and benefit local economies. And I will say that this year, just as a way of context, we had record lake levels in the Great Lakes. We have had this now 2 out of the last 3 years, and while there is a pushback a little bit about the International Joint Commission and lake levels, that climate and weather patterns have changed, and this has caused a real challenge in our communities. Resiliency, as was noted by by Mr. Case and others is a way of helping to make sure that rather than simply providing resources after a disaster has occurred, after flooding has occurred, after weather events have occurred, that resiliency and planning and doing all the things we need to do to assist state and local governments will help mitigate those costs and save, obviously, potentially millions, if not billions of dollars that we'd have to pay eventually as a response to those activities. So I just want to thank you for allowing the amendment to be made in order, and would certainly encourage its adoption for consideration on the floor.
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Morelli? Hearing none, anybody else wishing to testify? Hearing none?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hastings.
I've offered 3 amendments, one that I withdrew, but I'd like to ask unanimous consent that my statement be made a part
Without
of the
objection.
record in support of same. All right?
Are there any other members who wish to testify? Hearing none, that closes the hearing measure on a portion of HR 729. And we need 30 seconds, I'm told, to Xerox. Are we Xeroxing? Yeah. We need 30 seconds to Xerox.
I have an amendment.
Oh, we haven't introduced the, yeah.
Okay.
Maybe we can, yeah, well. We'll just talk amongst ourselves. Yeah.
What's happened in New England? This is 2 in a row.
I know, and yeah, bad referees.
Usually they have a referee.
You what?
The first time they haven't had a referee.
This is the first time I think they've lost at home, like 20
Yeah.
straight or something like that.
Because they didn't have the referees.
They'll be in the Super Bowl.
The referees finally went for somebody else besides New England.
Well, that's not fair. No, they're great, they're great. I mean, just they're bad, you know.
I've never seen it where, I never felt sorry for New England.
He is.
But
Unbelievable.
Tom, have you ever felt sorry for New England? The first time that they've ever had the rulings go against them like that. That was the first time I felt.
I actually like them. I think I respect the excellence of the effort.
They are,
I don't feel sorry for them. I just respect them. Which, you know, sometimes you know Oklahoma didn't make a comment. We snuck in the back a little bit there.
Are we all set? Okay, the chair will entertain a motion from the distinguished gentleman from New York, Mr. Morelli.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 729, Tribal Coastal Resiliency Act, a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Natural Resources. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 116-40 shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule makes in order only those further amendments printed in the Rules Committee report and amendments en bloc described in Section 3 of the resolution. Each amendment printed in the report may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in the report or amendments en bloc described in Section 3 of the resolution. Section 3 of the rule provides that the chair of the Committee on Natural Resources or his designee may offer amendments en bloc consisting of amendments printed in the Rules Committee report not earlier disposed of. Amendments en bloc shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for 20 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Natural Resources or their designees, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
Well, thank you. Let me just recap here. So there'll be 29 amendments made in order, 23 Democratic, 2 Republican, and 4 bipartisan. I know the number sounds a little off, but all germane Republican amendments were made in order. I think you only offered 4 of them. So Anyway, at this point, does anybody have any discussion or amendments? Mr. Cole?
Well, first of all, I do want to thank you for making so many amendments in order, and you're absolutely correct, and all the germane Republican amendments were made in order. So when I disagree with you, I don't hesitate to point that out. This one, I agree with you. You've been very generous. But because you've been so generous, we'll always ask for more. So I would, Mr. Chairman, just propose that, I find this a very bipartisan bill. I think the support for it will be broad. There'll be some pockets of opposition. I'd like to give members that could be satisfied, if there was some small tweak, the opportunity for that to happen. So I propose an open rule.
You heard the member from the gentleman. Any discussion? Hearing none, the vote is on the Cole amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Okay, any other amendments? Hearing none, then the vote is now on the motion from the gentleman from New York, Mr. Morelli. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. And this will be handled, no, the motion is agreed to, and this will be handled by Mr. Morelli. All right, and I think that's it. So without objection, the Rules Committee is adjourned.
We meet again tomorrow.
We meet again tomorrow.